A talented black woman walks into a boardroom filled with skeptical faces, only to be mistaken for the help and ordered to serve coffee to the executive team. The humiliating moment transforms into her most powerful weapon when she reveals her true identity and orchestrates a brilliant corporate takeover that no one saw coming. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On a blazing summer morning in Manhattan, the mirrored headquarters of Novatech shimmered with power and privilege against the cloudless sky. Maya Thompson gripped her resume tightly, the edges slightly crumpled from her nervous fingers, as she adjusted the collar of her crisp navy suit one final time before entering the building. The weight of her MBA from Wharton and 5 years of experience at a top consulting firm should have steadied her. But her heart still pounded with both nerves and unwavering resolve as she slipped quietly through the revolving doors. The 40-story atrium soared above her, a cathedral to capitalism with its marble floors and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her student loans. Inside, the air buzzed with talk of multi-million-dollar deals and looming acquisitions, men in tailored suits clustered in small groups, their voices carrying across the space with the easy confidence of those who had never questioned their belonging. A silver-haired executive laughed too loudly near the security desk, gesturing dramatically while describing his weekend in the Hamptons to an admiring circle of subordinates. Not one of them even glanced her way as she approached the reception desk. To them, Maya was invisible, just another hopeful, probably an intern. Certainly not a threat to their carefully constructed hierarchy. She'd experienced this particular brand of dismissal before, the way eyes slid past her as if she were made of smoke. But today felt different. Today she had an appointment with Harold Blackwood himself, the notoriously difficult CEO whose retirement rumors had been swirling through financial news for months. The receptionist's perfectly manicured finger hovered over her keyboard as Maya stated her name, a flicker of surprise crossing her face when she confirmed the appointment was real. 15th floor, executive suite, the woman said, her tone suggesting she'd already forgotten Maya before finishing the sentence. Maya nodded, straightening her shoulders as she walked toward the elevator bank, aware of the weight of what today could mean. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the polished interior that would carry her upward, though whether toward opportunity or humiliation remained to be seen. Maya's jaw tightened as she accepted the empty mug from Charles Whitaker, the senior vice president who hadn't even bothered to look her in the eyes. She forced a calm smile, one she had perfected over years of dealing with men like him. The boardroom buzzed with the energy of 12 executives in tailored suits, all preparing for what they believed would be a routine quarterly meeting. None of them paid her any attention as she slipped out toward the executive kitchen. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, gripping the counter edge. Maya Edwards had 3 degrees, 15 years of corporate experience, and had single-handedly saved 2 Fortune 500 companies from bankruptcy. Yet here she was, being mistaken for the coffee girl. She glanced at her watch. 8 minutes until the chairman would arrive. 8 minutes until everything changed. The espresso machine hummed as she prepared the coffee, remembering her father's words. Sometimes, Maya, the best advantage is being underestimated. Her father, James Edwards, had built Horizon Industries from nothing, creating a technology empire worth billions before his unexpected death 3 weeks ago. These men in the boardroom had no idea she was his daughter, his heir, or that she'd spent the last 5 years working anonymously throughout different departments of her father's company, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, her father's longtime executive assistant and the only person who knew her true identity. "Chairman Wilson just arrived. Ready when you are." She took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and returned to the boardroom with Whitaker's coffee. "And about time," Whitaker muttered, not bothering to thank her as he snatched the mug. The side conversations quieted as Chairman Wilson entered, followed by two lawyers Maya recognized from her father's estate planning team. The tension in the room shifted subtly as Wilson's eyes found hers, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Gentlemen," Wilson began, his voice commanding immediate attention, "before we discuss quarterly projections, I must address a significant change in leadership." Confused murmurs rippled through the room as Wilson gestured toward Maya. "I'd like to introduce Maya Edwards, daughter of our late founder James Edwards, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, the majority shareholder and new chief executive officer of Horizon Industries." The color drained from Whitaker's face as coffee sloshed over the rim of his mug. Maya stepped forward, her posture transforming as she shed the invisible cloak of servitude she'd been wearing moments before. 5 minutes had passed since she'd been ordered to fetch coffee. In 5 more minutes, she would begin dismantling the boys' club that had nearly destroyed her father's legacy. The journey that led Maya to this moment had been forged in hardship. Growing up in a cramped Bronx apartment, she watched her mother, Angela, work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Angela would leave before dawn for her hospital cleaning shift, rush to a diner for the lunch crowd, then finish with evening office cleaning, all while raising 3 children alone. The apartment they shared was barely 700 square feet, with Maya and her siblings sharing a bedroom where their mattresses covered nearly every inch of floor space. Every morning, Maya woke to the scent of burnt toast and her mother's whispered prayers, vowing that one day their sacrifices would be worth it. Angela always set aside 5 minutes before her marathon day to sit with Maya, telling her, "Education is the one thing they can never take from you." Those words became Maya's mantra through high school, where she studied by flashlight when electricity was cut, and through college, where she juggled 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a perfect GPA. Determination became her armor, and ambition her only escape from poverty. While classmates complained about 8 o'clock lectures, Maya remembered her mother's exhausted eyes after 18-hour workdays. When professors questioned whether someone from her background could handle the rigor of business school, she worked twice as hard to prove them wrong. The summer internships that other students used for networking, Maya used to send money home, ensuring her younger siblings had what they needed for school. By 22, Maya had graduated summa cum laude with a business degree, the first in her family to finish college. Her mother had saved for 3 years to buy a proper suit for Maya's graduation, a navy blue ensemble that Angela insisted would open doors. Maya wore that same suit to her first 5 job interviews, carefully steaming it each night. When Thornhill Industries finally offered her an entry-level position, Maya called her mother from a payphone outside their offices, both women crying with a mixture of pride and relief. The journey from that cramped Bronx apartment to the gleaming corporate tower had been brutal, but Maya was just getting started. While neighborhood kids played kickball in the streets, Maya spent her afternoons in the quiet corner of the local library, devouring dog-eared economics textbooks that smelled of dust and possibility. She carefully counted out quarters and dimes for bus fare, sometimes walking the 3 miles home when money ran too tight. Lunch was often skipped entirely, a small sacrifice that meant she could afford notebooks and pencils instead. The librarians knew her by name, occasionally slipping her a granola bar when they thought she wasn't looking. At home, her mother's perpetual exhaustion was a silent presence, the slumped shoulders, the dark circles under eyes that had once sparkled with the same ambition Maya now carried. She would watch her mother fall asleep on the couch, still wearing her housekeeping uniform, too tired to even make it to bed. These moments crystallized Maya's determination. Her mother's sacrifices would not be in vain. Failure simply wasn't an option. School should have been a sanctuary, but instead became another battlefield. The other girls snickered when she answered questions in class, mimicking her eager hand-raising with exaggerated motions. "Teacher's pet," they'd whisper. Though ironically, most teachers barely noticed her. their expectations for the cleaning lady's daughter already firmly set. Mr. Patterson, her economics teacher, once returned her perfect test with a suspicious glance, asking if someone had helped her with the answers. Each slight, each dismissive look, each closed door, Maya collected them all, storing them away like fuel for the engine of her ambition. When the guidance counselor suggested community college instead of the universities Maya had researched, she nodded politely while mentally adding another log to her internal fire. The world doesn't give second chances to girls from the East Side, her neighbor Mrs. Washington had once told her, meaning to be kind, to prepare her. But Maya had already learned this lesson through observation. She knew the rules of the game were different for her. While her classmates talked about finding themselves in college, Maya understood she couldn't afford such luxury. Every decision, every penny, every minute of study time was calculated with precision. The margin for error in her life was non-existent, and she embraced this reality with a determination that hardened with each passing day. Maya's first week at Columbia University delivered a harsh reality check. During introductions in her business ethics class, Professor Harrington barely acknowledged her credentials before moving on to fawn over the legacy students. When she raised her hand with insights about corporate responsibility, he cut her off with, "Let's hear from someone with industry connections." The message was clear. She didn't belong. In the dining hall, Maya overheard two students from her cohort. "She's only here because of the diversity scholarship," one whispered. "My cousin had better grades and didn't get in," replied the other. Maya gripped her tray tighter, but kept her head high as she walked past them. The group project assignments became another battleground. "Maybe you should handle the presentation visuals," suggested Tyler, a third-generation Ivy Leaguer, despite Maya having the highest grade on their preliminary research. "You know, make it look pretty." The condescension in his voice made her blood boil. Instead of confrontation, Maya chose calculation. She stayed in the library until closing, mastering financial modeling techniques that second-year students struggled with. She volunteered for the toughest case competitions, working twice as hard as her peers. When the Kaufman Investment Challenge came around, teams scrambled to recruit the strongest analysts. Suddenly, Maya's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her breakthrough came during the Northeast Business Strategy Tournament. When their team leader choked during the final presentation, Maya seamlessly stepped in, delivering an analysis so compelling that 3 judges requested her contact information afterward. The same classmates who had dismissed her now sought her guidance on their projects. "I underestimated you," admitted Professor Harrington, after she submitted a paper challenging his own published theories with impeccable research. "Your perspective on emerging market dynamics is unusually insightful." Maya built alliances strategically. She befriended Zoe, the quiet programming genius everyone overlooked, and Jackson, whose family connections opened doors throughout Manhattan's financial district. Together, they dominated every competition they entered. By the end of her sophomore year, Maya had transformed from the scholarship girl to the one to watch. Department heads began mentioning her name to corporate recruiters. The whispers in the hallway changed from diversity quota to future CEO material. When the prestigious Blackstone summer internship selections were announced, Maya's name topped the list. The same students who once suggested she make things look pretty now asked if she could put in a good word for them. Maya just smiled, remembering every slight, every dismissal, every doubtful glance, storing them away as fuel for the fire that drove her relentlessly forward. The next 6 months at Rowe and Mason became a masterclass in professional invisibility. Maya would arrive before dawn, meticulously preparing analyses that somehow morphed into someone else's brilliance by lunchtime. She noticed the pattern. Her white colleagues were visionaries, while she was merely detail-oriented. Her assertiveness was labeled aggressive, while theirs was leadership material. The conference room became a theater of microaggressions, where her suggestions would be ignored until repeated by male voices minutes later. That Tuesday morning crystallized everything. Maya had spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting the Westbrook acquisition report, a comprehensive strategy that could save the struggling client millions. She'd identified inefficiencies no one else had spotted, backed by data she'd personally mined. Yet, when presentation time came, senior partner Whitman casually handed her materials to Brad Peterson, a junior partner who'd been with the firm half as long as Maya. "Peterson will present your findings," Whitman said, not even looking at her. "You take notes." Maya watched as Peterson fumbled through her slides, stumbling over concepts he clearly didn't understand. When the client asked penetrating questions, his eyes darted to her in panic. She could have jumped in, saved him, saved the presentation. Instead, she wrote everything down, documenting each mistake, each moment of incompetence. That evening, alone in her apartment, Maya didn't cry. Something had shifted inside her. She opened her laptop and began drafting a plan, not for a client, but for herself. If the system was designed to erase her, she would have to build her own. Every slight, every stolen idea, every coffee she'd been asked to fetch while holding an MBA with honors, all of it became fuel for a fire that would eventually burn down the very barriers erected against her. They want me to be invisible," she whispered to herself, fingers flying across the keyboard, "but I refuse to disappear." Maya understood now that the path forward wouldn't be linear. She would need to be strategic, patient, and twice as prepared as anyone else in the room. The game was rigged, but she was learning its rules, and where they could be bent. Someday, she promised herself, she would sit at a table where no one questioned her right to be there. Maya poured the coffee with practiced precision, filling Charles Whitaker's monogrammed mug exactly 3/4 full, just how the CEO liked it. The rich aroma of freshly ground Colombian beans wafted through the executive break room, providing a momentary distraction from the tempest raging in her mind. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched before her like a concrete jungle, the afternoon sun glinting off glass skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. She'd stood in this exact spot hundreds of times before, serving executives who barely acknowledged her existence. But today, everything felt different. 2 sugars, no cream, she whispered to herself, completing the ritual that had become second nature over the past 3 years at Whitaker Industries. The irony wasn't lost on her. An MBA graduate with honors, reduced to memorizing coffee preferences of men who earned in an hour what took her a month. Her fingers brushed against the folded paper in her pocket, the edges worn from the countless times she'd taken it out to reread it, hoping the words might somehow change. The letter had arrived exactly 14 days ago, delivered in a cream-colored envelope with a wax seal she didn't recognize. At first, she'd thought it was junk mail, another credit card offer or insurance scam. But the moment she'd unfolded those pages, her entire world had tilted on its axis. "Your mother wanted you to have this when the time was right," the attorney's cover note had said. What followed were pages of revelations that connected dots Maya never knew existed, about her adoption, about her biological parents, and most shockingly, about her connection to Whitaker Industries. The letter contained her birth certificate, legal documents, and a handwritten note from a woman who had died giving birth to her. A woman who, according to these papers, was Charles Whitaker's sister, the same Charles Whitaker who now waited impatiently for his afternoon coffee, completely unaware that the woman serving him was his niece, and according to the trust documents included in the package, the rightful heir to 26% of Whitaker Industries' shares. Maya took a deep breath, steadying the slight tremor in her hands. For 2 weeks she'd carried this secret, unsure how to proceed, terrified of the implications. But today, as she watched Charles bark orders into his phone, dismissing a junior executive with a casual wave, something inside her hardened into resolve. The time for hiding was over. Maya stared at the letter in disbelief, her hands trembling as she traced the embossed seal of Harrington and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. The words blurred before her eyes as she tried to make sense of what she was reading. According to this document, her biological father was David Thompson, co-founder of Novatech and one of the wealthiest tech innovators of the past 3 decades. And now, he was gone. The letter stated plainly that he had passed away 2 weeks ago after a private battle with pancreatic cancer. But what left her breathless was the next paragraph. David Thompson had named her his sole heir, granting her a controlling 51% share in Novatech, a company valued at $11 billion. "Mom," Maya called out, her voice barely above a whisper. When her mother entered the kitchen, Maya held up the letter. "What is this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" Her mother's face crumpled as she sank into a chair across from Maya. Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for Maya's hand. "It's true," she whispered. "David was your father." Over the next hour, her mother revealed a truth she'd kept hidden for 30 years. She and David had fallen deeply in love during college, but his wealthy family had made their disapproval clear. They would disown him if he married a black woman. When her mother became pregnant, the pressure became unbearable. David's parents threatened to cut him off completely, which would have destroyed the fledgling tech company he was building with his college roommate. "He wanted to choose us," her mother said, wiping away tears. "But I couldn't let him sacrifice everything. We agreed to part ways, but he never truly left us. Those anonymous college scholarships, the mysterious job recommendations, that was all David watching over you from a distance." Maya felt a strange hollowness in her chest. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "He made me promise not to," her mother replied. "He said it would be easier for everyone, but he always planned for you to know the truth someday. He was determined that you would have a future brighter than his own, one not poisoned by his family's prejudice." Maya stood frozen, her mind desperately trying to process the bombshell that had just detonated in her life. The father she'd grown up believing had abandoned her family was actually Gregory Novak, the visionary founder of Novatech. For 32 years, she'd carried the weight of his absence, constructing an entire identity around overcoming that abandonment. Now, in an instant, that narrative had been completely rewritten. "I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to Jonathan. "Why would he keep this secret? Why would my mother never tell me?" Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the photo frame on the desk, Gregory Novak in his prime, a ghost who had somehow been watching over her career all along. Jonathan's expression softened. "Gregory had powerful enemies, Maya. He believed keeping you at a distance was the only way to protect you and your mother, but he never stopped watching over you. Your lucky breaks in the industry? The scholarship that paid for your MBA? The mysterious recommendation that landed you your first tech job? All him working behind the scenes?" Maya felt a complex cocktail of emotions, gratitude mixed with resentment, validation tinged with anger, all those years of struggling, of fighting twice as hard as everyone else, when a single word from her father could have opened every door. Yet there was something undeniably powerful about knowing she'd earned her success on merit, not nepotism. "The board meeting is in 48 hours, Jonathan continued, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "Gregory's will is explicit about his wishes, but Richard and his faction won't surrender control without a fight. They've already started their campaign to discredit you." As if on cue, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Unknown executive set to inherit Novatech. Questions about qualifications surface." The vultures were circling already. "I've spent my entire career proving myself," Maya said, a new resolve hardening in her voice. I didn't ask for this inheritance, but I won't let them take what's rightfully mine, or destroy what my father built." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "Gregory always said you had his fighting spirit. You'll need every ounce of it in the days ahead. The question is, are you ready to step into a spotlight that will change your life forever?" Maya looked out the panoramic windows at the sprawling tech campus below. Somewhere down there, Diane was probably already plotting her next move. The path ahead was treacherous, but for the first time, Maya understood exactly why she'd been fighting her whole life. Determined to honor both her parents' sacrifices, Maya kept the news secret as instructed by her father's attorney. For 3 agonizing days, she'd carried the weight of the truth while continuing to endure the indignities of her position. Each condescending request, each dismissive glance from Richard and his cronies, she met with the same professional smile she'd perfected over years of navigating corporate America as a black woman. Only in private moments did she allow herself to feel the full magnitude of what was coming. The mahogany boardroom doors felt heavier today as Maya pushed through them, coffee mug in hand. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the 23 executives seated around the massive table. Most were engrossed in their phones or laptops, barely acknowledging her presence. Richard sat at the head, scrolling through his tablet with practiced nonchalance. Maya noticed how his wedding ring caught the light as he gestured impatiently for his coffee without looking up. "Thank you, Maya," he said flatly, still not meeting her eyes. "You can wait outside until we need you again." Maya placed the mug before him with perfect composure. "Actually, I'll be staying for this meeting." A few heads turned. Richard finally looked up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "I don't think so. This is a closed board meeting." The double doors opened again, and Mr. Winters, her father's attorney, entered with 2 associates. The room fell silent as the distinguished older man nodded respectfully to Maya. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Winters announced. "I'm here on behalf of the late Jonathan Reynolds, founder and majority shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises." Richard's face drained of color. "What is the meaning of this, Mr.?" Winters removed a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Before his passing, Mr. Reynolds made certain arrangements regarding the future of this company. Ms. Maya Reynolds is not, as you've been led to believe, simply an executive assistant. She is Jonathan Reynolds' daughter and, as of 9 o'clock this morning, the controlling shareholder of Reynolds Enterprises. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Maya stood perfectly still, her heart pounding but her expression calm. She felt every eye on her now, not with indifference or mockery, but with stunned disbelief. The coffee mug sat untouched before Richard, steam still rising from the dark liquid as his empire slipped through his fingers. Charles Whittaker barely looked up as Maya set his coffee on the table. The steam curled upward as she placed it carefully beside his leather portfolio. His eyes remained fixed on his phone, thumbs tapping rapidly against the screen. "Faster, please." "We don't have all day," he snapped, prompting a few snickers from the other executives seated around the massive conference table. The sound rippled through the room, quiet yet unmistakable. These were men who rarely laughed during meetings, unless it was at someone else's expense. Maya stood her ground quietly, her dignity unshaken. The weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her back felt heavy, but she'd carried heavier burdens. Her grandmother had cleaned houses for 40 years without complaint. Her mother had worked double shifts at the hospital while raising 3 children alone. This moment was nothing. She reminded herself that humility in this moment was not weakness, but the final step before her rise. The board meeting would commence in exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes until everything changed. 9 minutes until Charles Whittaker and his smirking colleagues would understand exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Whittaker?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. "That's all," he replied dismissively, waving her away without looking up. Maya nodded and turned to leave. As she walked toward the door, she caught Richard Townsend's eye. The company's lead counsel gave her the slightest nod, imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. The documents were ready. The votes were secured. In the hallway, Maya checked her watch. 8 minutes remained. She straightened her blazer and headed to the executive restroom. Not the one she'd been expected to use as an assistant, but the private one reserved for C-suite executives. She entered without hesitation. The security badge clipped to her belt, granting her access that would have been denied just 24 hours ago. Inside, she faced the mirror. The woman who stared back wasn't the same person who had started at Whitaker Industries 5 years ago. That woman had been hopeful but naive. This woman was tempered by experience, strengthened by adversity, and absolutely certain of what came next. Maya took a deep breath and opened her briefcase. Inside lay the folder containing proof of Charles Whitaker's systematic embezzlement and the board's unanimous decision, minus Charles himself, of course, appointing her as the new CEO, effective immediately. Suddenly, the double doors swung open. Richard Evans strode in, his tailored suit immaculate as always, but his face betrayed a tension that silenced the room instantly. The chatter died as he took his position at the head of the table, not bothering to sit down. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the deathly quiet boardroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Richard began, his voice unnaturally controlled, "before we proceed with today's agenda, there's an urgent matter that requires our immediate attention." He nodded toward Patricia Winters, the company's legal counsel, who stood up with a document in hand. Patricia adjusted her glasses and began reading. "This letter was delivered to our legal department this morning from the offices of Goldstein, Patel and Associates, representing the estate of the late David Thompson." Her voice was clear and professional, but even she couldn't hide the slight tremor as she continued. As Patricia read the contents of the letter, the atmosphere in the boardroom transformed. Maya watched expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to shock. The letter methodically explained that Maya Robinson was, in fact, David Thompson's daughter and sole heir, and as such, had inherited his 34% stake in the company, making her the largest individual shareholder. Charles Whitmore's reaction was the most dramatic. His face, normally flushed with confidence, drained of all color. He gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted frantically between Maya and Richard, as if hoping one of them would laugh and reveal it was all an elaborate prank. This is preposterous," Charles finally sputtered, breaking the silence. "She's just a—" He caught himself before finishing the sentence. But everyone knew what he had nearly said. Whispers erupted around the table. Board members leaned toward each other, exchanging hurried comments behind cupped hands. Some stared openly at Maya, reassessing her with new eyes. Others checked their phones frantically, perhaps verifying the information or alerting their allies. "Is this some kind of joke?" asked Veronica Shields from across the table, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I assure you, Ms. Shields, this is no joke," Patricia replied, her legal training evident in her composed response. "We've verified the documentation thoroughly. The DNA test results are conclusive. And Mr. Thompson's will is legally binding and explicitly clear." A gasp ricocheted across the polished mahogany table as Patricia held up another document. David Thompson's handwritten letter addressed directly to the board, explaining his decision and his confidence in Maya's abilities to help lead the company into its next chapter. Maya stepped forward, her voice unwavering as the boardroom fell into stunned silence. "I stand here not as your assistant, but as the rightful owner of 40% of Novatech. My father entrusted me with his legacy and this company's future." The words hung in the air like a physical force, making even Charles Whitmore temporarily speechless. The board erupted in chaos. "Preposterous!" shouted one elderly board member, his face flushing crimson. "This is some kind of joke," muttered another, while others demanded immediate proof. Charles tried to object, raising his hand to silence the room. But for once, his words faltered, his usual commanding presence diminished by the shock. "I have all the documentation right here," Maya continued, nodding to Rebecca, who distributed folders containing notarized copies of her father's will, stock certificates, and a detailed letter explaining his decision. "My father knew that if he simply handed me the reins, you would never accept me. So he devised this test, to see if I could understand this company from the ground up, to prove my worth not through nepotism, but through merit." The board members flipped through the documents with expressions ranging from disbelief to growing realization. Maya pressed on, projecting confidence forged from years of adversity. "In the 6 months I've worked here, I've identified 17 operational inefficiencies, developed relationships with every department head, and created a comprehensive 5-year growth strategy, which you'll also find in those folders." Charles finally found his voice. "Even if this is legitimate, you have no experience running a company of this magnitude. This is absurd." Maya smiled, the kind of smile that carried both compassion and steel. "Actually, what's absurd is that you never bothered to check my background. Before coming here, I ran my own tech startup for 3 years before selling it to focus on my father's health. I have an MBA from Stanford and worked at 2 Fortune 500 companies. I didn't just make coffee, Mr. Whitmore. I was studying you all, learning how this company breathes." The room fell silent again as the reality settled in. Maya wasn't just claiming ownership, she was demonstrating leadership. And as the board members exchanged glances, something shifted in the atmosphere. The impossible was becoming inevitable. Maya's presentation was a masterclass in corporate strategy. With each slide, she painted a vision of Novatech's future that was both ambitious and achievable. "Our competitors are playing checkers while we have the opportunity to play chess," she explained, pointing to market projections that showed untapped potential in emerging markets. Her plan wasn't just about profits. It seamlessly integrated sustainability initiatives that would position Novatech as an industry leader in environmental responsibility. "What impressed me most," whispered one board member to another, "and is how she's identified efficiency improvements that actually enhance employee satisfaction rather than diminishing it." The room nodded in collective agreement as Maya outlined a restructuring that would eliminate bureaucratic bottlenecks while creating more meaningful work experiences for team members at all levels. When she reached the financial projections, even Harrison leaned forward in his seat. The numbers were compelling, a 28% growth trajectory within 3 years, with risk factors meticulously accounted for. "These aren't pie-in-the-sky figures," Maya assured them. "Each projection is backed by market research, competitive analysis, and conservative assumptions about adoption rates." As questions came, Maya handled them with the confidence of someone who had anticipated every possible objection. She didn't just have answers, she had insights that transformed challenges into opportunities. When the CFO raised concerns about initial investment requirements, Maya walked him through a phased implementation approach that would generate early wins to fund later stages. The energy in the boardroom had transformed completely. These weren't just executives evaluating a presentation, they were potential allies, envisioning a future they suddenly wanted to be part of. Even the board members who had been most dismissive of her earlier were now taking notes and asking thoughtful follow-up questions. "This plan doesn't just save Novatech," observed the most senior board member, breaking a long silence after Maya concluded. "It positions us to lead in ways we haven't considered before." The comment triggered nods around the table. For the first time since she'd entered the building that morning, Maya wasn't being seen through the lens of assumptions or prejudice. They were seeing her capabilities, her vision, her leadership. Richard Evans cleared his throat, drawing all eyes to the head of the boardroom table. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as he adjusted his glasses and spoke with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I've listened carefully to everything presented today. I believe the path forward is clear." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Maya. "I move that we vote immediately on appointing Maya Thompson as the new Chief Executive Officer of Novatech." Charles's face contorted in disbelief. "This is preposterous. We can't possibly—" "I second the motion," interrupted Diane Mercer, the normally reserved head of legal affairs. "Let's put it to a vote." Charles shot to his feet, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "I urge you all to consider what's at stake here. Novatech needs experienced leadership, someone who understands our traditions and—" "Traditions," Richard cut in. "Is that what we're calling it now, Charles?" The room fell silent as Charles desperately scanned the faces around him, searching for allies. But something had shifted. The same board members who had barely acknowledged Maya's existence hours earlier were now avoiding Charles's pleading gaze. "All those in favor of appointing Maya Thompson as CEO, please raise your hand," Richard announced. One by one, hands rose into the air, first Richard's, then Diane's, followed by Thomas from R&D. Even old Harold Peterson, who had served on the board for 25 years, raised a trembling hand after a moment's hesitation. Charles watched in horror as his empire crumbled before his eyes. "This is a mistake you'll all regret," he hissed. When the final count was tallied, the result was undeniable. 9 votes for Maya, 3 against. The decision was made. "Congratulations, Ms. Thompson," Richard said, extending his hand across the table. "Or should I say, Madam CEO." Maya rose from her seat, her posture perfect, her expression composed despite the earthquake of emotions beneath her surface. The woman who had been ordered to serve coffee just hours ago was now in command of a billion-dollar empire. She accepted Richard's handshake with a firm grip, aware that every eye in the room was watching her first moments of leadership. "Thank you for your confidence," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I won't let you down." Maya stared at her phone as it vibrated relentlessly against the mahogany desk. 47 missed calls in the last hour alone. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now her executive office, she could see the media circus forming in the plaza below. Vans with satellite dishes, reporters clutching microphones, and photographers with telephoto lenses, all jockeying for position. The headlines were already spreading like wildfire across social media. Bronx woman claims billion-dollar throne. Coffee server to CEO, the Maya Washington story. Rags to riches, how one woman conquered Wall Street. Ms. Washington, Channel 4 is asking for an exclusive. And the Times wants to know if you'll sit for a profile piece, her newly appointed assistant said, poking her head through the door. "Tell them I'll address everyone at the press conference next week," Maya replied, not looking up from the quarterly reports she was studying. She'd been awake since 4 that morning, absorbing every detail of the company's operations. An old high school classmate had texted, "Remember when we couldn't afford prom dresses? Now look at you." Her former manager at the coffee shop called 3 times. Even relatives she hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered her existence. Maya silenced her phone and walked to the window. The empire that now rested on her shoulders employed over 20,000 people across 17 countries. The board meeting that morning had been tense, half the directors clearly waiting for her to fail, the other half cautiously optimistic but wary. She'd need to win them over. One by one, on her desk sat the personnel files of the executive team. 5 of the 8 vice presidents had already tendered their resignations, unwilling to serve under her leadership. She'd need to rebuild, and quickly. The company's stock had dropped 8% since the announcement, and competitors were already circling, sensing weakness during the transition. They think I don't belong here, she whispered to herself, pressing her palm against the cool glass. They're waiting for me to crack under pressure. Maya returned to her desk and pulled up the company's organizational chart. Departments that had been siloed for years would need to start communicating. The toxic culture that had festered under previous leadership would need to be dismantled, and somewhere in the mountain of financial reports was the key to turning around their declining market share. The task ahead was monumental, perhaps impossible. But as Maya looked at the framed photo she'd just placed on her desk, her mother in nurse's scrubs, working double shifts to put food on their table, she felt a familiar resolve hardening within her. She hadn't come this far to fail now. Maya wasted no time making her mark. Within 48 hours of taking the helm, she called an emergency board meeting. The tension in the room was palpable as she strode in. No longer carrying coffee, but carrying a vision that would reshape Novatech's future. For too long, this company has been led by people who mistake arrogance for competence and tradition for strategy, she announced, her voice steady and resolute. Today, that changes. With methodical precision, she outlined her restructuring plan. Charles and 3 other board members who had enabled his toxic leadership were removed, their faces blanching as she detailed their failures with irrefutable evidence. Some tried to protest, but Maya's preparation was flawless. She had documented every instance of discrimination, every bypassed innovation, every missed opportunity their narrow-mindedness had cost the company. In their place, Maya elevated 4 leaders whose brilliance had been consistently overlooked. Jamal from engineering, whose patents had quietly generated millions. Sophia from marketing, whose campaigns consistently outperformed despite minimal resources. Raj from product development, whose innovations had been repeatedly credited to his superiors. And Elena from operations, who had salvaged failing projects without recognition. These are the people who've been holding Novatech together while others took the credit, Maya explained. It's time they received their due. The news spread through the company like wildfire. Employees who had felt invisible suddenly saw possibility. Those who had considered leaving decided to stay. The hallways buzzed with renewed energy and purpose. Wall Street noticed too. Within days, Novatech's stock jumped 15% as analysts praised the bold restructuring. Under Maya Chen's leadership, we're seeing a company transformed from within, wrote one influential financial publication. And this isn't just diversity for show, it's strategic brilliance, unleashing untapped potential. What surprised many was how quickly results followed. Projects that had stalled for months suddenly found solutions. Teams collaborated across departments with unprecedented efficiency. Customer satisfaction scores began climbing steadily. We're not just changing who sits at the table, Maya told her executive team during their first strategy session. We're changing how the table works. Every voice matters. Every perspective brings value. That's not just good ethics, it's good business. And the numbers were proving her right. Maya knew that victory would come with a price, but she hadn't anticipated the viciousness of Charles's revenge. Within days of his ousting, the business tabloids were running stories, with anonymous sources claiming she was woefully unprepared and riding on Daddy's coattails. The Wall Street Journal ran a particularly cutting piece suggesting the board had made an emotional rather than rational decision, questioning whether a 32-year-old with limited executive experience could truly lead a billion-dollar corporation. Have you seen this garbage? Diane slid her tablet across the conference table during their morning briefing. The headline read, "Nepotism at Blackwell has sentiment trumped sense." Maya glanced at it and handed it back. "File it with the others. Don't you want to respond? Issue a statement. Your PR team is standing by." Maya shook her head. "Charles wants me distracted, defensive. He's betting I'll waste time fighting shadows while the company suffers." She pulled up the quarterly projections on the main screen. Our response isn't going to be in the press, it's going to be right here." Over the next weeks, while Charles whispered to journalists over expensive lunches, Maya was redesigning the company's innovation pipeline. While he hinted at her incompetence on business podcasts, she was personally meeting with their 5 largest clients to secure their confidence. While he predicted the company's imminent downfall, she was finalizing the acquisition of a promising tech startup that would revolutionize their product line. The board members who had initially been skeptical began noticing the difference. Blackwell's stock rose 3% in her first month. Employee retention improved dramatically as she implemented policies that valued talent over politics. "The numbers don't lie," she told her executive team as they reviewed the first quarterly results under her leadership. "And neither does the market. Let Charles talk. We'll keep building." When Forbes requested an interview about the controversy, Maya declined. Instead, she invited them to cover Blackwell's upcoming product launch, an event that would ultimately grace their cover with the headline, "Maya Blackwell, the quiet revolutionary transforming an industry giant." Maya's leadership at Novatech proved transformative beyond anyone's expectations. Within 18 months, the company launched 3 groundbreaking initiatives: a carbon-negative manufacturing process that competitors scrambled to license, an artificial intelligence platform that revolutionized supply chain efficiency, and a renewable energy division that secured government contracts worth billions. The stock price tripled, making Maya's own shares worth a fortune, though she rarely mentioned this fact in interviews. What truly set her apart, however, was her commitment to opening doors for others. Every Tuesday afternoon, Maya cleared her calendar to personally mentor 20 young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Many were first-generation college students or came from neighborhoods like the one where she'd grown up. "The most valuable thing I can give isn't money," she often told them. "It's showing you that the path exists and helping you navigate the invisible barriers." She established the Novatech Future Leaders Program, providing full scholarships and guaranteed internships to 100 students annually. When board members questioned the expense, Maya simply pointed to the program graduates who now filled crucial roles throughout the company, bringing fresh perspectives and untapped talent. The corporate culture at Novatech underwent a remarkable transformation. Gone were the days of closed-door meetings and information hoarding. Maya instituted transparent communication policies and collaborative decision-making processes that initially made long-time executives uncomfortable, but ultimately unleashed innovation from unexpected corners of the organization. "Remember when they thought I was the coffee girl?" Maya laughed during her keynote at the Global Business Forum. "That day taught me something powerful about assumptions and potential. Now we've built a company where nobody's talents go unrecognized because of how they look or where they came from." The media dubbed it the Maya method. This combination of cutting-edge innovation and human-centered leadership. Business schools created case studies about Novatech's remarkable turnaround, but for Maya, the most meaningful validation came in quiet moments. When a young engineer from the projects told her she'd changed his life's trajectory, or when former skeptics like Harrison sought her guidance on transforming their own organizations. On the anniversary of her first day, Maya stood in the boardroom where it all began, a cup of coffee in her hands. The rich aroma brought back memories of that fateful morning, how something as simple as being ordered to serve coffee had become the catalyst for everything that followed. She ran her finger along the rim of the porcelain cup, smiling at the symmetry of the moment. 10 years ago, in this very room, surrounded by men who underestimated her, she'd found her voice. "When I walked into this building a decade ago," Maya addressed her executive team gathered around the table, "I was wearing my mother's blazer and carrying my father's briefcase full of dreams they never got to pursue." Her voice carried the weight of their sacrifices, the nights her mother had worked double shifts to pay for Maya's education, The way her father had instilled in her an unshakable belief that she belonged in rooms exactly like this one. The team watched her with admiration. These people who had become family through countless late nights, breakthrough moments, and challenges that had tested them all. Among them sat Richard, now her trusted advisor, who had witnessed her journey from the beginning. His eyes held a special pride, knowing he'd recognized her potential when others had only seen someone to fetch their coffee. Novatech wasn't built by a single person, Maya continued, setting down her cup. It was built by every employee who believed in our vision when others called it impossible. The company had transformed under her leadership, not just in profits, which had tripled, but in culture. They'd pioneered family leave policies that had become industry standards and created mentorship programs that had launched hundreds of careers. Maya walked to the window, gazing at the city skyline that had watched her rise. The billion-dollar empire she now commanded was more than a business success story. It was proof that barriers could be broken, that assumptions could be challenged, that the most unexpected person in the room might be the one destined to lead. Turning back to face her team, Maya raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To the next decade," she said with quiet confidence, "to building something that matters, to opening doors for those who come after us, and to remembering that true leadership begins with service." As they raised their cups in response, Maya felt a profound sense of completion. Her journey had come full circle, from being ordered to serve coffee to commanding a boardroom. But the lesson remained the same. Leadership wasn't about power or titles. It was about resilience, courage, and the willingness to serve a purpose greater than yourself. And with that understanding, Maya knew she was ready to lead Novatech and everyone watching into a future where anything was possible.